Before we get started, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the fact that we are on the traditional territories of the Huron, the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and that we as Canadians are experiencing tremendous wealth and universal health care because we broke our treaty promises. We committed a genocide against the people. We exploited the resources that took thousands of years of Indigenous stewardship to create. We murdered hundreds of thousands of their children in the name of our religion and don't really do anything about that. We're now creating climate change because we don't care for the land as well as they did. And we should probably give them their land back at this time before we face even more death and destruction.
I'm Canadian, and I would say the longer I live in America, the more I feel that one of the biggest differences between Canada and America, at least where I'm from, is the institutionalized racism and the fact that there is no societal acknowledgement of it. Like a small thing. I was in Canada recently for a comedy show, and before the show, it was in a big theater, a voice comes on and says, "We would just like to acknowledge that we were on the land of Indigenous people. This is not our land."
That's nice.
The audience needs to take a moment and acknowledge it. And now the comedy show.
Wow.
And just those little things are acknowledgments.
That's amazing.
And I think acknowledgement is, and that's why reparations, be it significant or symbolic, is an acknowledgement. And I think without acknowledging a problem, you can never move past it.
What does it mean to state a land acknowledgement? Are people doing so because they stand for truth and reconciliation? Or because everyone else is doing it? Or because it's become almost close to mandatory these days? In this report, we hear from a long-time award-winning teacher who says that land acknowledgements have become close to programming. Drea Humphrey here with Rebel News, and in recent weeks I brought you a story of great public interest. It was an interview with a Mr. Jim McMurtry, a teacher of over 30 years who found himself in hot water, canceled, if you will, suspended for matters that include, get this, teaching students, the truth about the leading cause of death during the times that residential schools were in operation. Now, if you follow your history, you would know that's illness, things like tuberculosis, but in a country that still predominantly claims that there were 215 children's remains found in an unmarked grave at the former Kamloops Indian residential school, you can see why such facts might come across as offensive. Now, if you want to know more about the truth to that claim, which is that there's not been a single body discovered yet to date, you can watch our documentary at kamloopsdocumentary.com. Mr. McMurtry's story got picked up after you saw it here at Rebel News by the National Post, Western Standard. But today I have another interview with Mr. McMurtry. He's still not out of hot water. But in this one, he talks about whether or not we need to consider the constant encouragement or even sometimes being told to do land acknowledgements, especially when it comes to students. Before I jump to that, I just want to play an example of what that could mean to some people. For most of us, it just means we're acknowledging we want truth and reconciliation and that we recognize some horrible things took place to First Nation people. But you'll see here that this activist that I met when covering some reports at the former Kamloops Indian residential school, well, when it comes to truth and reconciliation, she has something else in mind.
It is time that Canada realizes that they are on stolen land. And it's time that Canada gives it back.
So how much land and where would that land be when you say it should be given back?
All of this land.
So the whole country?
The whole country. I'm not thinking about other Canadians. I'm thinking about children.
But what about the children who don't have Indigenous heritage?
I'm thinking about our own. This is our land. This is our home. Everybody's just a visitor.
Now, that is just one extreme opinion, but I'm sure it's shared by some. And it makes you wonder whether the land acknowledgements we're seeing in emails or by politicians or being encouraged for students to participate in should be further explained or explored. Here's what Mr. McMurtry had to say.
Some people think that I probably don't really have a right to even, or an opinion worth listening to as a
an older white person. But I'm a teacher, and one of the advantages of teaching for 4 decades is you've seen what other teachers have done over a long period of time. And one thing that we haven't done before is land acknowledgments. And I know it sounds, maybe to many people, land acknowledgement sounds like a pretty harmless thing. Just like much of the new ideology that's being indoctrinated in school sounds nice, diversity, equity, inclusion, and so forth. If it were that, but it's not. That's very Orwellian. It's war is peace. To just again, I'm just thinking right now, what's a kid thinking when there's a land acknowledgement at my school in Abbotsford? We had it every day, and it's almost 2 minutes long. And so the first thing that I think a child's thinking, certainly I'm thinking as a teacher who's got only so much time to get material across to students before that, they get quarters or the semester's over or whatever, is that it's repetitive. The kids get it. Kids are smart. I don't think I ever meet students that aren't smarter than I am. The idea of repeating the same thing daily is not just a waste of time, but I think it's a form of torture.
And I've been seeing more and more land acknowledgments in my life. At sporting events, before meetings, at schools. It feels like the thing to do.
But more importantly than that is the fact that I find classrooms are becoming just more diverse, and the fact that more kids coming from other countries. And I think it's hard for many of them. I have kids from the Syrian war, I'm sure now from Ukraine, many coming from, very difficult situations in places like the Middle East and Africa and so forth. So in some ways, they're not them saying they're escaping or running away, but in some case that's true. And they come to Canada and they want to have a sense of belonging, and that's what we do as teachers, to make them feel as though, you have a place here, and it's just as important as anybody else in the classroom. And then they're hearing that they're not on their land. They're hearing that they're committing injustice. It's never some people, it's never the government, it's never the people in the past, it's we. We are doing all these bad things to Indigenous people. And I think it's unfair, not only because these are people that are pretty new and they don't really think they're guilty of anything, but more importantly, they're threatened with the idea that maybe that the house that their family has worked hard to buy, or apartment, or whatever, might be taken away from them.
Before we begin this evening's performance, we would like to acknowledge that this theater stands on territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Petun First Nations. We are also mindful of broken covenants and the need to make right with all our relations.
Sorry, hello? Sorry, excuse me, should we go?
Excuse me?
Oh, no, I just mean if we're on someone else's land, shouldn't we leave?
Oh, no. The theater is here now. We'd just like to acknowledge whose land it is.
I'm sorry, I'm so confused. So if we're on someone else's land, shouldn't we do something about that? Or
So I think land acknowledgements to some people might seem innocuous, but to me as a teacher, I think they're incredibly dangerous. A lot of teachers fought for a long time not to have the national anthem at all in schools. And in most schools right now, it's in front of a big event, an assembly, or maybe once a week in some schools. And then a lot of people go, okay, as long as it's no more than that. But that's something that involves all of us. It's consensual and it's inclusive. But to have a land acknowledgement where you talk about the harm that's been done to one group long ago and what we need to do for one group today and tomorrow, it just seems to me is so exclusive of the kids that aren't part of that group. And for those that are part of it, who are Indigenous, I would think it'd be very embarrassing. It's the bigotry of low expectations, that there's something wrong with them.
So, is there a right or wrong way to do land acknowledgments? Or is it enough to just do them?
It's not enough, I think, for people to just say, hello, I'm so-and-so. I acknowledge that I'm on this land. Anyway, continuing on.
I'm an educator, as said, and forget everything I just said. Forget everything you said. I think there are better things to talk to kids about. I think you should talk about things that you haven't talked about. So if you're a history teacher and yesterday you talked about the history of India, why don't we talk today about the history of China, or talk what happened, in the moving west, or anything that they don't know about. I just think it's a really poor use of time, and it's also insidious. It's insidious because no teacher is going, let's have land acknowledgements every day, and no student is going, we want land acknowledgements. And I think it comes from very few people at the top of our society are trying to find ways to promote themselves. How can I build my career? How can I, oh, look, I'll pretend that I'm the savior, that I'm the leader for all those people who can't manage on their own. And I'm going to make things better for them. I'm going to rewrite. I'm going to recreate history. Look at me.
What do you think a white savior is?
Look how great I am. Here I am in Africa doing a great job.
It's almost like they want to come to the rescue of the black man, but it's disingenuous because they're only doing it because they want the recognition.
And it's like, no one asked you to do that. You can go anywhere else and do it. So
it's not for education. It's not for nobody wants it. It's just people like Trudeau. And that's what I found extraordinary. That Trudeau's transforming our country for him. He gets to dance around. He gets to travel the world, on his, fossil fuel, churning private jet to just look at me. I'm Mr. Woke. I'm saving people who in the past, didn't have me around. Because I, 100 years ago, if I went back in time, I would have given my hard-earned money so there'd be better residential schools. I would have fought for gay marriage. I would have been telling the early settlers, as they're worrying about bears and wolves and when their next meal is, I would have been saying to them, but what are your pronouns?
If you appreciate that at Rebel News, we don't back down from bringing you the other side of the story like the state-backed legacy media does, then consider supporting our journalism in a fun and informative way. You can become a monthly subscriber at rebelnewsplus.com. That will give you access to our exclusive content, including our documentaries, which includes Kamloops, The Buried Truth. Again, that's rebelnewsplus.com. We appreciate your support.